All right. So we're going to get started. I'm going to go through the presentation. Good to see you too, Cynthia. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the process, the data, and the explanation. Then I'm going to pause and answer questions. We'll take comments, and then we're going to talk about strategy and ways to use this information in a way that's meaningful to you and your initiatives in North Carolina. So let me go ahead and hit share. Okay. So if you were not on the monthly networking call that we do on the last Thursday of every month in July, then you missed kind of the overview. If you were, you got the overview, and now this is going to be the deep dive specifically for North Carolina. And so what I started doing was looking at, a question came up. So I did this other project first called the Exit Interview Project, where I talked to about 50 organizers across the country. And one of the things that kept coming up was, how do we build power, right? In rural communities, how do we do that? And so we looked for counties where we could make that happen. Now, the thing is, many states had other counties that were impactful that we should 100% still focus on, even if they didn't make that power building list. So I want you to remember that the list and these counties is just a short-term piece of a long-term strategy. The Republican Party has been really good at long-term strategizing. We have not so much, and so we have to correct that. So there were 17 states that came up in this data. I'm going to focus with you guys on North Carolina. For North Carolina, this is the data that was gathered. It was the 2020 presidential, House, and Senate elections, the 2022 gubernatorial, House, and Senate elections, your voter registration stats, your voter turnout stats, your state population, and your percent rural. So all of that data was looked at, and I'm going to share with you how I got it, how I used it, and how we got where we are, okay? So when we first started looking, I started looking at states that were either swing states or had a margin of 10% or less, key races, things that we needed to look at heading into 2024 and beyond. Once I got the states, then it was time to see within those states what counties also had margins that were 10% or less for each of the elections that I just told you about. So the key to that was to manually go through and look at the results from each of the races, and then make a list by hand. This is what I did, of all of the counties where that was the case. And then I looked to see which counties were continuously showing up in each of these races with slim margins, right? Which ones were showing up maybe with different results in the same year for like Senate and House. And then once I got those, then it was time to identify the top of those repetitive counties. And then we had to add in population data and percent rural, and then common district/seats. What you will notice is we did not start in reverse and say, who do we want to get out? Nope. We started with the data, and we let the data lead us to where we can make change the most significant in the shortest amount of time. So what you're looking at here and what you're going to get in this PDF is the clean version of the data. I'm also going to share with you the raw data, where you get to see me color code things and check it all out and show you how it looks. But this is the end result. So for North Carolina, you can see that we have 10 counties that made this list of, like, these are the counties where we can make change, and we can make change fairly quickly. And so I put together that for your presidential, Senate, and House, your gubernatorial, and then Senate and House for 2022. Now I'm going to show you what that looks like from the data on my end, okay? I'm already there, so let me share this with you. Okay, so when I started looking at this data, I went to like a CNN or Politico, right? And I just looked at the map first, because why? The map very easily shows me my 10% and my 5%, right? And I still needed to be sure that this was accurate. So believe it or not, I still went in and looked at each individual county with my manual eyes and wrote it down. And so this gave me a gist, a good starting point for what I was looking at. And once I did that, like I said before, I did it for each of these races, okay? Every single one of them. And so then once I did that and I identified the ones that were the top or were repetitive, then it was time to go to your actual Secretary of State's website or your Board of Elections and look at that official data because it will show me not just the Republican and the Democratic votes, but the other or independent votes, right? And that is going to play a really big role. The other thing that we did was we used census data to show us the percent rural of populations. So, because that's important, right? When we're talking about rural counties, what percent of these counties is rural, right? And how many rural people does that mean? And what does that look like in terms of registered voters or people that are non-voting? So once you go across and you get all of this down, I broke it down to say, okay, let's take a look at the population and then voter registration for 2023. And if the same numbers of people were voting, what would that look like? So what you'll see is North Carolina looks fairly good compared to other places, right? You'll see that anywhere from 62% to 72% or so, 71% of each of these counties is registered to vote, right? But are they turning out to vote? That becomes the second question. So this data is useful in two ways. It will help you with your resources to know, do we need a voter registration drive in these counties? Or do we need a GOTV drive in these counties, right? What do we need to be putting our resources behind to get people to turn out and vote? And so if you'll look at the presidential elections, gubernatorial and Senate elections, you'll see that voter turnout is less than 60% across the board. It's 55%, 56% or less for presidential, right? So 6 out of 10. It is about the same as 55% for your gubernatorial race. And then you had one county that really, they cared about their Senate. Everybody else, not so much. So it's interesting to kind of see the statistics and to see, okay, well, who's turning out and who's not? Where do we have, people who aren't voting? Like I'm in Tennessee. We are a state that about 38% of the people vote, and that's it. We are not a partisan state. We are a non-voting state, which is a problem. So the next thing is to look at the presidential data and each race data individually. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about specifically from this data is this other column right here. The reason why the other column is so important is because these are people who are already participating in the process, right? This is not somebody that you have to get registered to vote. This is not somebody that you need to convince that they need to get out and vote. You don't have to come drive them to the polls. These folks got there, but somehow or another in 2020, they could not fix it in their heart to vote for either Biden or Trump, knowing that whatever their vote was, if it wasn't for one of those two, it was useless. And so we have to start to think about what is the messaging that we need to be conveying to this type of voter, right? How do we reach this particular type of voter? And the other thing to look at is the difference in votes. So one of the things that I looked at, so for example, if you look at Nash is a county that democratically it won, right? However, it won by 80 votes, right? Or I did it backwards. I subtracted them, didn't I? 120 votes. And so if I know that was 120 votes and there were 497 people that voted other, if the Republicans are smart, they're going after this 497, which means very easily they could flip this county back the other way. It is flippable. So this data isn't just about where can we make gains, where can we flip, but it's how do we maintain and are we paying attention to the places where we are vulnerable? That's what this gives us a picture of. The other thing that I wanted to see was in these areas where you do have margins, if you could win over the voters in this column, how many more would you need? And a lot of times it left us with a surplus. And we wouldn't need any more than that. So like, this is another one, Wilson, where we need to be paying attention, right? We have several of those, but Jackson, Granville, all of these are within 1,000 votes or less. 500 is what my sweet spot was for calling them close, right? And then everything else was whether or not they were flippable. The other piece that that I want you to be looking at with this particular data is the vulnerabilities, the flippabilities, and where can we simply make progress by winning the people who are already coming out to play in the process. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And then I wanted to look at the trends along the way from one election to the next. Let me check this chat for you real quick. Oh, that's a long one. Hold on. Oh, Matt, I should have known. I should have known. Beasley underperformed in rural North Carolina last year. Okay, that's going to be a lot because I'll look at it here in just a second. May not be for me to cover on this, but I'll get to it in just a second. I'll call on you. I was like, oh my gosh, that's a long comment in the chat. Okay, so then it began to look at what's the trend in two things: voter registration and actual voter turnout, right? So if I start to look at the Senate race in 2020, right, and I look at the Senate race in 2022, I'm looking at are the people voting. So 11,108 people voted in the Senate race in 2020. In 2022, that number was 7,000. We know part of that's going to be because 2020 was a presidential race, right? But is it 4,000 worth? Right? You're talking about more than a third of the people didn't vote. So one of the questions that I've been asking is, are we getting politic fatigue? Right? I think that that's part of the strategy. I think the Republican Party just simply wants to make us tired of this mess, right? And voters are getting disengaged. And so we have to be mindful of that when we start to say, and not just discount it. Some people will say, oh, well, we instituted automatic voter registration, so that accounts for the increase. Well, correlation doesn't equal causation, right? We don't know that to be true. We can't just say that the decrease in people showing up to vote is because it was a non-presidential election, right? Voter turnout is one of your biggest issues. You're looking at Hispanics, Latino registrations. Yeah, or 45 and under, 60 of those are unaffiliated. Yeah, so Tom, this is a conversation that we've been having about the Hispanic and Latino community and getting them involved in the process. I can tell you that it was challenging in Georgia because, one, people have a fear if they're undocumented or if they have other people in their family that are undocumented. There's fear about that. There's also being able to have a conversation that Democratic policies are not uneconomic, right? Somehow or another, the Republican Party is the fiscally conservative party. And what people don't realize is it's at the expense of our lives and livelihood, for goodness sake. But we have to be able to have this conversation with those types of voters that attracts them to us. And I think we're lacking in that. So you said, and all of the HL registered under 45 never voted. Yeah, I don't know that my son-in-law is Hispanic, and I don't know that he's ever voted, no matter how much I harp on it. And like, you guys need to get out. I just don't know. And so we have to ask, why aren't people coming out to vote? Do they not feel like, so these are common things that I heard in Black and brown communities growing up, is it doesn't matter. They've already decided who's going to win, right? There's not enough of us for our vote to matter, which in some cases, maybe that's true, right? Yeah, Cynthia, they are underperforming, right? Unless you're in major cities. And I will say this, one of the things that I've noticed is that when you're in the South, when you are in the South and rural communities that are heavily minority, they're much more engaged in the political and electoral process than communities like where I'm born and raised here in Northeast Tennessee, because we didn't have a huge civil rights movement here in Northeast Tennessee, right? So there's not an awareness of how important the process is. Our grandmothers weren't, our great grandmothers weren't heavily involved in that. And so I think that there's a disconnect in some of the rural communities, especially where we are the super minority, like where I'm at. It's 97% white, right? And so when you look at state data, and there's literally little asterisks beside our health data that says there's not enough of us for them to even for them to do the calculations to matter, it gives you an insignificance. And so we have to come out in a way that makes people feel seen and feel heard. So I 100% agree with you in that respect. The next thing that I want to talk about with this is looking at voter registration active, inactive, and where do we have opportunities? Yeah, so we didn't go all the way back to 2018. We didn't go back to 2018. I did, transparently, I did in Georgia, just because I worked Stacey's campaign in 2022, and I was like, what the heck happened between 2018 and 2022? And for us, one of the things that I noticed across the board is in Georgia, the same Black candidates that ran in 2020 or 2018 had much lower results in 2022. And when I think about it, the racial rhetoric in this country since 2020 till now has just gone through the roof, right? And whether you like it or not, especially in the South, that type of rhetoric is going to tap into and touch on a lot of deep-rooted, many times unconscious bias that's there. And I think that that's definitely had an impact. I want to talk about the break the majority that you're talking about, Helen, because when I hear break the majority, it sounds hopeful. And this is one of the things that we keep talking about is how do we have communication and conversation that makes people feel hopeful about this process again. Many people don't feel hopeful anymore. And when I think about a candidate that truly made me feel like hopeful, before Stacey, for a completely different reason, for me, that was Barack Obama, right? I believed him in his authentic, authentic self. I believed that he believed the things that he said. Did he do everything that Black and brown people wanted him to do? No, right? He also didn't have a Congress that was willing to let him do a lot of those things either. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking about, when is the last time we felt hopeful, right? Because believe it or not, the only thing that combats fear is hope. It isn't love, it is hope, right? And somehow we've lost that in our messaging. And so in the last call that I had, it was Michigan. And one of the things that we talked about was in our monthly networking calls, having more strategy sessions around messaging and how do we convey our messaging in a way that is impactful. So talking about this data, so I want to bring the data into the messaging conversation, okay? So when I think about what do you use this data for? You use it for funding, you use it for resources, right? When I can take this data and I can take it to someone and I can say, hey, listen, and let me just show you this. You can already see when I get to right here in the House votes, remember when I said when I get to that last part of my funnel is to look where's their commonality in the seats or the districts. And what I noticed was out of all of the counties that I had for North Carolina, out of the 10, half of them were in District 1. So when I get to this side of the spreadsheet and I get to North Carolina, give me a second to scroll down to North Kakalaki, where I lived for almost 10 years of my life. The reason these counties were chosen in North Carolina were for all three races: presidential, House, specifically for District 1, and for the Senate, right? So if you look at the data like this, here's what it will show you. It shows you that all the counties that we chose were about 39% to 79% rural, right? So that's 176,000 rural people that are there, okay? It looks at the number of people that voted, how many were registered, and how many did not vote. 80,600 registered voters did not vote, right? And out of these counties, 5 of them are House District 1. So if I take 80,000, the 80,000 registered voters in these counties that didn't vote, and I look at the number that was needed. So in the presidential race, the vote difference was 74,483. Well, 108% of what's needed is in the 80,000 registered voters in just these rural counties that were registered and didn't vote, right? If you look at your House District 1, 12,216 votes, right? 5 of those counties are there. So if I go back to these 5 counties and I look at the people who didn't vote, who are in that district, do we have over 12,000? 100% we do, and just one or two of the counties. Right? So imagine how powerful your argument becomes or your presentation becomes when you can say to people, listen, these 5 rural counties are all in House District 1. The vote difference was 12,000, and we have 5 counties that equal 60,000. You know what I mean? People that didn't vote. This is a worthwhile investment of your money to flip this seat, right? And when you look at the vote difference in the Senate race, it was 121,737. The people that didn't vote in that Senate race were 132,000. Right? So this is when the data becomes super powerful, is because now you have numbers to back up what you know in your heart and what you desire to achieve. And when you put those two things together with good messaging, now you have the ability and the framework and the foundation to build a super successful organizing campaign that moves the needle forward in rural communities in progressive ways. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to see if anybody has any questions or comments about the data, the process, or anything that we've talked about so far. Don't be shy. Vicki.
Yes, so I was a little late, and I came in when you were talking about the other voters, the total population and the other voters and those who were registered. And I wondered where you got the other voters. So we have to go back and try to find them.
Secretary of State's website. So, so the only way to get the other numbers is to go to the Secretary of State's website. So literally my process started with like the CNN map so I could see my pretty blues and reds. And then once I got my list of the counties for each of those races, and I had found the ones that were showing up repetitively in each of the races with slim margins of 10% or less, then I took that and went to the Secretary of State's website and looked up each race individually to calculate their other numbers. And then we used the census spreadsheet to give us population and percent rural, so that we could calculate the rural people that are in those areas as well. Yep, that's where
Okay.
yeah. it was yeah, believe it or not, I think I did this whole project in about 4 to 6 weeks, and for 17 states across. And you'll notice that not every state that's on the list made like the top, right? But it's because maybe it wasn't impactful in a certain district. And what I had to do was look at all of the 17 states and which counties do I need to put in to make sure that we're building power and building power in the most effective way. And so it's not that if it doesn't make that little final list, so what, right? There's still this other data that gives you all of the counties that were there. And let me just share this with you. If that county had a population of 5,000 or less, it didn't make it to the list, because again, if we're talking about how do we build power, it's where do we put the money? And is it better to put that money in a location that has 35,000, 40,000 people or 3,000 people? So I had people that reached out to me, well, what about Hillsdale? I said, Hillsdale's on my raw data list, baby, but Hillsdale didn't make the final cut because its population is like 800. And so all of those things came into play when we looked at the final numbers. Yeah, I was surprised at the data that was available to me, Tom, and it was interesting to see which Secretary of State sites were easily navigated and which ones were not easily navigated. And, you know, how freely could I find voter registration numbers? Another thing that's interesting, and where we could take this data. So imagine this, because depending upon your Secretary of State's website, a lot of times I can not only get this data to see who's registered, who's inactive, and who's active, but then I can actually see who's registered Democrat, who's registered Republican, who's registered Independent. I can separate it by race or by, gender identity and different things like that. And so this is when you can really get in the nitty gritty when you start to think about, okay, how could I use this data? We know that women, there's more of us than there are men. We all know that, right? So when we're pulling those numbers and we're looking at the issues, how do we make it relevant to everyone? So I shared this on the Georgia call because it's a true story. I was in Atlanta working the campaign, got pulled into a barbershop. And they were asking me, I knew they were testing me because, inner city and rural, they are the same. I keep saying this and I will continue to keep saying it. Inner city people and rural people don't trust outsiders. They don't get properly funded and nobody comes to talk to them until it's time to vote. They are the same. So I get pulled into the barbershop and these guys are asking me policy questions, just kind of testing me and I'm answering them. And we get to talk about reproductive rights. And yes, you can 100% say to a man, well, what if this is your mom? Or what if this is your sister? Or what if this is your girlfriend or your wife, right? But that's a what if, right? You have to make it real for them. So in Georgia, the way the law reads is that as soon as you can safely take DNA from that baby and establish parentage, he can start paying child support. So I said to the guys in the barbershop, did you know, according to Georgia law, you can start paying child support potentially as early as 6 weeks. They all were like, what? I said, yeah, you didn't know that's the way the law read? One guy in the barbershop literally broke out his cell phone and he say that again. Next thing you know, I get invited to a lounge. The next Thursday, they've got drinks and hookahs. It's 10 o'clock at night. Here I am in my Stacey Abrams shirt. And they call me up on stage in between a music and poetry set and their feature for the night. And I get up and I say, listen, I know you guys do not want to talk politics. I'm the last person you want to see, but this is important. Early voting had already started, right? So I start talking about different things and I share with them how I got to be here. And I say the same thing. The men were like, what? And I was like, yeah, have you voted yet? Have you voted? Yeah, because now it's real for you. So a lot of times when we think about organizing, we're so serious about it, right? We're so serious and we're so stuck on the talking points and the political jargon that we forget to make it relatable to your everyday life. And that's what matters, Matt.
My thing in the chat about Sherry Beasley was kind of a different take on the Warnock situation, which was North Carolina's 80 of the 100 counties are rural. It's the 12th most rural state. It's 41% rural. And she's running against a Republican House member who votes against disaster aid for Hurricane Florence, votes against broadband, votes against PFAS. I think most Americans know the threat to their drinking water now from PFAS. It's been in the news quite a bit. And so, this is, if you don't address those issues, if you don't go into these rural counties and address them, that leads to underperformance, and that's not how you win.
No, and that's the other thing. So earlier we were talking about making sure that you identify the issue in the county that we're talking about, right? And I'm a big believer. I keep telling you, my 4 pillars, what I call the 4 pillars, are healthcare, housing, education, and economic stability, right? You can say HEHE and say he, right? If you need a little acronym to kind of remember it. But whatever the issue is, it comes back to one of those 4 things. So the key is twofold. You want to know what your opponent is doing and has done on those issues that are of most importance to that particular county that you're in. And then you have to be able to tie it into what your candidate is going to do and how and what the impact is and what the difference is. So another example, I'm out at a tailgate for the Falcons, right? Stacey Gear, I'm getting whatever, doing what I do. And I got this college girl, real cute and whatever. And we're talking and she's talking about housing and rent and whatever. And I said, well, listen, let me ask you a question. Did you know that the state of Georgia has $400 million in rental assistance money sitting in the bank? And she said, what? And I said, yeah. I said, Kemp right now is denying them 60% of the time. And she said, I'm one of the 60%. They denied my application. I said, have you voted yet? When's the last time you checked your voter registration? Right? So again, it's knowing little nuggets that are impactful. I mean, we laughed about how long the website was because we had so much, information on policy. But all I did was pick the one or two most impactful things for each of the policies that would get people's attention, right? I stood at the barber shop and said, do you know anybody that's, had trouble paying their rent in the last year? You know anybody who's faced eviction in the last year? Because I sure do. Every hand in the barber shop went up. Well, let's talk about rental assistance, right? So now I've tapped into something that they care about. And so this is how we do it. We take data to get resources, funding, boots on the ground. We get people who are authentic, who can communicate, right? And mean what they say, because if you go into the hood or you go into rural communities and you are not authentic, they will both tell you bye. Nobody's got time in either one of those spaces, right? So, but if you show up that way and you are armed with the issues that are relevant to that community, you can engage them in this process. And we know that the votes are already there. The people for these votes are already there, and we know it by the data, right? Where they vote for Dems, most logic. Yeah, it's very eye-opening when you really, I got so excited about this data when I was diving into it. I was like, oh my gosh, did you know in South Carolina there's 5 counties? My mom was like, what? I was like, yeah, 5 counties in South, like it was very eye-opening, right? Now, did it make the power list? No, it's South Carolina, right? but it's still there, right? And so if each of us becomes vested and aware of the data, and we tap into the issues and the influencers. So I'm going to use Matt as an example. He was on my Georgia call this morning. And when we were on that Georgia call, he specifically talked about Peach County. And I said, well, what's the issue in Peach County? And he said, cannabis, easy. Young voters, it's cannabis. And I said, okay, so has there been an issue campaign around cannabis in Peach County? He said, no. I said, well, there ought to be one, right? There ought to be one. And then you look at who in Peach County is your influencer. Who are they? Who has the ear of the public or the young people, right? Who can lead that issue campaign? And then you mobilize that. You do an issue campaign for the last quarter of 2023 into the first quarter of 2024. And then you simply transition it into a political campaign heading right into 2024 with that same influencer, that same issue right by your side. And this is what I would do. I would then look for a state where cannabis has been legalized. I would find a county with similar demographics to Peach County. And I would talk to the city about what kind of revenue they generated. I would talk to small business owners to see what that looks like. And then I would bring it back to Peach County. And then I would say to the people, look, this is what can happen if we legalize cannabis. And it's already been done. Their roadmap is there. People love blueprints, right? So now what do I have? I have data that says the votes are there. They are available to you if you can get them. I have an issue that can mobilize these voters to vote. And I have proof that when you do the thing they care about, it makes money for everybody. And that appeals to every single voter. So that's how we can use this data effectively to make change in our communities. I believe the far right Constitution Board is currently trying to collect signatures to get that party on the, but perhaps she would not be in favor of that. Okay, so I think that right now it is dangerous. Do I think that we need more than a 2-party system? Yes. Do I think we need to be trying to do that between 2024? Absolutely not. We are not in a place that we are ready for that. And right now we are in this sweet spot where lifelong Republicans can no longer be a part of the party. They just simply can't. There's many of them that are there. And a lot of times, so you know how we talk about Democrats in rural communities and there's closet Democrats? Right now, there are closet non-Republicans that used to be Republicans because they don't want their Republican friends to know that they're not part of the MAGA Republicans, right? We have that same thing. And so it's being able to give those people permission to come to the polls and vote and, you know, and empower them. And so how do we do that? We find that commonality and that common ground. Our system needs an overhaul. We can't afford it right now. You can't save democracy and change your system at the same time. You can't. You have to have a stable foundation first, and we do not have that, right? And that has to be the conversation. When we talk to people and people are like, well, we need this and we need to get rid of hey, I am with you. And we need to crawl before we walk, right? We are at a place that is unstable. So like when people say, I believe that God chose Donald Trump for a time like this, I said, girl, me too. He reminded us how delicate democracy is. We needed a wake-up call. We got it. I agree, right? Now we got it and we know what we need to do about it, right? And when I say it, they do what y'all just did, right? They kind of chuckle because I'm not arguing. I'm going, absolutely he did. Because we forgot how quickly we can lose the privileges that we have. We got complacent, right? And human nature is to do what has been done. So, and that's the other thing that when we talk about messaging, that we've been talking about how to do that in a way that isn't triggering and brings people into the collective. And so I like to have conversations in a way that doesn't offend people. And so I've shared my Medicare for All story a few times today, but I'll share the abortion one now. So I led a healthcare protest here in Northeast Tennessee for quite a while. And one day I had this woman come down to our encampment, and she said, hey, Danny, when you get finished with this here protest against Ballard Health, you need to do an abortion protest. And I said, I don't know if I'm the right person for that. And she said, well, I think you'd be great at it. And I said, well, listen, my views on abortion are directly tied to my faith. And she said, me too. I believe, God don't want them to killing babies. And I said, well, let's make sure you and I are talking about the same belief in God. And I said, because I was born and raised Christian. And she said, me too. And I said, okay, so do you believe that God is the creator or giver of life? She said, yeah. And I said, do you believe that God is all knowing? He knows your beginning from your end. He sure does. Do you believe that God is everywhere present? He is. Do you believe that God is all powerful? Absolutely. Well, based on those four things that we believe about God, that would mean that at the time God gave a woman life and she became pregnant, he knew whether she was going to have an abortion or not. He was there in the clinic when she had it done, and he didn't use his power to intervene. So why do you think that you know better than God? And I just get dead silence every time. Well, I'm just saying, well, no, can you answer that for me? Because I don't believe that I know better than God. I just don't believe that. And then they just get stuck right there. So we're no longer arguing about a woman's right to her body. We're no longer arguing about, is it wrong or is it murder or is it not? We're now discussing the very reason you think you have the right to do what you do. I love to take the thing that people think they believe and use it against them, right? So it's how do we do those types? And I didn't say anything that would be abrasive. She's not going to go home and be mad at me. She's not going to cuss me out and call me a liberal, believe in whatever, right? But I've given her a nugget to think about on the way home. And that's the other thing, is going into these conversations knowing that sometimes we are the harvester of somebody else's hard work, and sometimes we are the planter of the seed. And we never know what part of that process we're entering into. We never know where someone is. And so what we have to be careful of and be mindful of, we may be the one and only representative that they encounter face to face of that liberal agenda, right? We may be their first and only experience of what that really looks like. So we've got to make sure it's something that they will want to participate in, right? Any other questions about that? And then I'm going to go into just a little bit more data before we wrap up. Okay, so in July, when we first started looking at this process, the other thing that we were looking at are counties without Democratic representation. So I want to talk about two final things. I want to talk about voting trends in terms of registration and turnout and numbers, and then we're talking about leadership within in our counties and what that looks like. So if I go back over here to North Carolina. So what I wanted to look at in North Carolina is the trend in registered voters. So if I look for Anson County, it went down, it went up in Granville and Jackson, it went down in Lenoir, right? It went down in Martin, it went down in Nash, up in, I'm not even gonna try it. It went down in Scotland, down in Washington. So you've lost 31,000 voters in between those 2 years time period, right? So then I would take and compare it to, so this is where you sit right now in terms of 2023 and what your active numbers look like, how many are registered, how many are active, active Dems, active voting Republican, and active unaffiliated. I love this. North Carolina shows you who your unaffiliated voters are. Look how many that is. 96,497 unaffiliated voters. So remember that number, 96,000, and then go back over here and look at your difference, 74,000, 12,000. Of course, that's just one district, and then 121,000. And that's just in these counties that we're talking about. You want me to repeat the questions about abortion and not knowing more than God? Got it. 30%, 36% statewide. See, I love the fact that you know the numbers. And then the last thing, and then I will repeat what I just said. So the counties without leadership in North Carolina, what I could find on your sites was you only had 4. And you're going to get this in the email after this: Allegheny, Graham, Jones, and Tyrell, right? But the rural population there, because they're all 100% rural, is almost 35,000. And this is how they're voting currently. So immediately when my eyes look at this, I'm immediately drawn to Jones first and foremost, because they're close. And then Tyrell second. These two would be where I start. Just saying. So real quick, and then I'm going to go over what I said again. You're going to get, after this, I'm going to give you, here we go. Whoops. At the end of this, I'm going to give you an email that's going to have a recording of this deep dive presentation. You'll get a PDF of this presentation. You'll get a link to the top 100 rural counties project. And I'm going to include a link to the exit interview project. And the reason why is that exit interview project is full of so many good nuggets for organizers, for philanthropic organizations and institutions and legislators, and how we can effectively use this data to organize going into 2024. You're going to get an invitation to join our monthly networking calls. I'm now leading those calls every last Thursday of the month. And then you'll get the counties without Democratic Party representation in your state. So that's it. So the 4 questions, I think that was Robert that asked me. So the 4 questions that I ask is, I'll say, I want to make sure that you and I are talking about the same thing, because people use words interchangeably and they may or may not mean the same thing to you. So do you believe that God is the creator or giver of life? And they say yes, every time. And I'll say, do you believe, and I do it in this order. Do you believe that he's the creator and giver of life? Do you believe that he's all knowing? And then I back it up with a part of scripture that says, does he know your beginning from your end? Right? And then I'll say, do you believe that he's everywhere present? And then I'll say, do you believe he's all powerful? And that would mean that when God gives a woman life in her belly, he knows whether or not she's going to have an abortion. He is present in the clinic when she does, and he does not use his power to stop it. So what makes you think that you know better than God? Like, I escort at our women's clinic here. The city, Bristol is Bristol, Tennessee, and Virginia. And so our clinic is on the state line, right? So we get a lot of people from the surrounding states. And we have a lot of antis who come and protest and stuff. And, you know, they'll say, can I talk to you? And I'm more than happy to have conversation. And I did that same thing with this one guy, and he looked kind of baffled for a second. He says, yeah, but, you know, murder is wrong. And I said, well, let me just say something to you. I said, where in the Bible does it say that one sin is greater than any other? And I said, how do you know that what this woman is going through, how do you know whether or not it's the thing that she needs in her journey? How do you not know that this is the thing that does turn her to God? And do you think standing on the street shaming her is going to get her there? And what if you murder her? What if you're yelling that her hands are laden with the blood of dead babies? What if she goes home and she commits suicide? Have you ever thought about the impact of what you do? And bless his heart, he didn't know what to say. I'm just asking you. Is what you doing? And this is what I'll say. At the end of the day, I do not argue religion. What I know is that God is love and love is God. So I look at what you say and what you do, and I ask myself, is that love? Are you here in love? And if you are not here in love, you are here in ego. And you can't tell me that that's God, because I simply know better. And now I'm not arguing about, is it a heartbeat or if it's electricity? I'm not arguing any of those things. I'm addressing the core thing that they believe gives them the right to be there and to vote the way they do. And I'm not saying you're wrong in what you're believing. I'm saying, if you believe what I believe, I don't know how you can think the way you think, right? The way that I do Medicare for all, I would never walk around this town and say, hey, you guys, we should have that Medicare for all. Because they'll be like, you Marxist, socialist, whatever kind of is they want to call me, right? And so instead, I'll say, well, let me ask you this question. If you had to pay me $1 every month to live here in Tennessee, no matter what you did or didn't do, you had to pay me $1 every single month. And I told you that I have a club you could join. And if you join my club, you don't have to do anything different, but keep giving me your $1, and I'll give you 90 cents of your $1 back. Would you want to join my club? And they say, well, yeah, I get most of my money back. And I said, well, that's Medicare for all. That's what it means. You're paying for it. You want to get 90% of your money back? Right? And now I'm not arguing about politics. I'm just making it make common sense. Most people have a 6th grade reading level. We have to talk to them like they're in 6th grade. Yes, Nina. Oh, you're on
I was
mute.
just trying to clack. I wasn't trying to ask. No, I like that though. I like your stories. I think you should write down more of those for us to use.
So one of the things that we are talking about doing is doing more organizing training and messaging training. When I was on the campaign, I never worked a political campaign in my life until last year. And some of the operations team, they were out in the field with me, and they came back unbeknownst to me, talking to the chief of staff. Next thing you know, I got a signal message that said, what are you doing tomorrow at 11 a.m.? I don't know. Am I in trouble? That's literally what I said. Am I in trouble? Did I do something? And he said, no, I want you to come train the ops team on organizing and de-escalation and how to have, conversations with people who disagree with you. And some people shy away from that. I love it. Because what I believe is that if you enter every conversation with respect and compassion, you will leave with understanding, even if you do not gain agreement. Right? Respect and compassion always will get you understanding, even if you don't get agreement. And so that's the place where we have to come from. And so I think that we have to get out of the head of it, the politics of it, and say, how does this matter? Literally, how does this matter to the mom who's working 2 jobs, who doesn't know if her kids are going to eat when they get home from school, right? I'll tell you how I got my son-in-law to go get a COVID test today, because he's a tightwad and doesn't like to spend money. He didn't want to pay for a test, and he felt bad and he didn't want to drive and go get one in the drive-through. And I said, well, let me ask you this. I said, if you have COVID and Bella gets it, and Bella has to be in the hospital, are you going to take off work and stay home and watch Mila, the 2-year-old, and put Dominic on and off the school bus so that Anaya can be in the hospital with Bella? Who's doing that? He took his tail right out the house and went and got a COVID test. Because he don't want to miss a week or two of work. So I can't see. I had to find out what's important to him. He didn't want to pay $25 for a COVID test. Well, do you want to miss a week of work while Bella's in the hospital? What do you want to do? He went and got a COVID test. This is the way that we have to talk to people. Yeah, find the thing that matters to them and then just make it make sense. I know you don't feel good, and I hate that you don't feel good. And here's what we need to do. I know the system sucks. I know politics is horrible right now, right? And we can't afford to give up. Alexa.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing all of these stories and these great information. I love the messaging, but I'm curious. You talked about, like, for example, the barbershop you went into and asked if folks knew anybody who was struggling paying the rent. How did you end up in that barbershop? Is that something you scheduled? Was it an event? Did you just walk in off the street? Did you schedule yourself an appointment? Can you just share with us how you are accessing the people to relay these messages out there?
Yeah, I go where they are. So the first day, we were down there canvassing, and I was going to every barbershop, because if I want to find a Black man on a Saturday or a Friday, I go to the barbershop. And so I was going all through the West End. There's a whole row of barbershops. And so the first day I go in, and there's only like 1 or 2 people in there. And so I still chatted with them and and I left some signs and whatever. And so the next day I'm going back up through the thing, and one of the other guys is in there who they told about me, and he comes out the door and literally says, hey, come on in here and talk to us. So I did. But the reason that I got invited in is because I made it relevant to the 2 people that I talked to the day before. And I know that in that community, I know that I'm going to be tested, and I was, right? They asked me things just to see if they could get under my skin or roll me up. And, so I can give it back and forth. We can get a little sassy. And then when I earned their respect, I could tell, because we got into real conversation. Then they said, will you come bring some more flyers by? And then I said, well, can I ask you a question? And I would just drop by. I lived in Midtown. I would drive to the West End to go to Walmart. And so I could pop into the barbershop, right? And they began to expect me. And then I said, hey, can I host a little rally here at the barbershop? And they said, yeah, we'll supply. And they did. They supplied the music. And then I went and I got all of the local businesses around there. So Bakari's Pizza. Bakari's barely still in business. So guess what? I didn't get Domino's or Papa John's or whatever. I went back and I asked for some money, and Lauren Growalger said, give it to her. And I got Bakari to bring me pizzas. And then I took swag down, right? And did those types of things. And so when I put the money in, I put it back into their community. And so they respected me because of that. And then I was just real with them. You're right. Somebody should have been here talking to you long before me. I can't do anything about the fact that nobody talked to you, and it is now August, or it is now September. I can't make up for that. All I can do is share with you how this is going to be good for you and what will happen if you don't vote. That's all I can do. And sharing that, just being honest with people, we have to acknowledge we are most of the time not paying attention to those people until it's far too late. But if you can take ownership of that and say, you're 100% right, they will give you grace. So that's how I would find them. I would go to where they are. I went down to Old Nat Day, right? Old National is another Black part of Fulton County down in the South. And so it's like 90 some degrees. Then people did not care about sweatshirts. They wanted our fans, right? every woman. And so when I went to approach the Black women, keep in mind, it's 95 degrees. And they'd be like, I already registered to vote. Sis, I'm not here to ask you about voting. I promise. I'm not here to ask you if you are registered to vote. Listen, I don't want to be here either. Look, you see my hair, it's falling out, girl. I'm sweating too. Now I've built a commonality, girl. My curls are gone too. Your weave sweating out, that. And then she chuckles. And then I'll say, all I want to know is, has somebody talked to you yet about our constituent services? And they'll say, well, what is that? So Stacy was really smart. She had a constituent services team, and we had an online form. And what she had was a drop-down box for every county. And then she had a list of things that people needed help with, whether it's healthcare, housing, baby formula, veteran services, disability benefits. And we had a team of people that if people filled that form out, right, now we have their info and they selected the boxes, we had a team that consisted of, social workers and lawyers and different people, and they would contact them and put them in touch with agencies in their counties that had the resources for what they needed. And this is what I would say is, hey, do you know anybody who needs this? I'm not asking you, do you need it? I'm saying, do you know anybody who needs it? And now that I've given her something, now I can say, have you updated your voter registration or have you looked yet? Because I've given her something first. Yeah, I'm reading your message. So yeah, we want to talk about the messaging and how to get to the people and find them where they are. So it's how to get there, right? How to get there with the funding and all of that stuff, how to get the right people. Who do we need to be part of that conversation? What are the issues that we need to talk about and how do we talk about them? Nina.
Well, and I was just going to say, what's coming across to me as I listen to you is that you're also speaking with people. You're not, it's not a project. You are authentically talking with folks. And I think that's the other thing that we need to remember is that, it's talking with people and not just at them.
Yeah, I'm
and
not
ongoing-
voting for your vote.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to actually care, and they can tell when you don't. They can tell when you don't. And I know that some of us are tired because we've been in it for a long time, but it's time to get back in the groove. We've got, a little over a year to get it done, right? Right, to campaign without seeming to campaign. You better believe it. Yeah. So if you haven't already, make sure that you register for next Thursday, 2:00 is going to be our monthly networking call. And so it'll be next Thursday, 2:00. And thanks, Esther. I'm glad that you guys joined me in the conversation. I love this part of the work. I just think it's what matters. And so I'm excited that you all join me. Tell all your friends. Let's keep connecting and empowering and learning from each other. Because if we do, we're going to bring about big change that will be unexpected come 2024. So you guys have a great day and weekend. All right. Bye-bye.